Why is there something rather than nothing at all? If everything in the universe had a beginning, where did it all come from? Does the apparent design we see in the universe and biological life point to a designer? Where does our knowledge of right and wrong come from? Those are all interesting questions, but let's put those aside for now and ask a more interesting one. Does God exist? And if He does, what does He want from us? The question of whether or not God exists has been around for all of recorded history. What a lot of people don't know is that the more that science and history has revealed about the world around us, the more evidence we have for a creator and designer of the universe. As a matter of fact, today the evidence is more open to the existence of God than it has ever been before. The evidence shows that the universe began to exist, which points to a beginner. That the universe is finely tuned to allow life, which points to a fine-tuner. That there is an incomprehensibly complex order and structure to the human DNA, which points to a superintelligence that designed it. That our ability to know deep down what the difference between right and wrong is, points us to a moral reality that is best explained by a moral law giver. And most profoundly, the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus is so great that it is best explained by a creator that was willing to enter into our world and walk among us. All of this evidence cries out for an explanation, all of which is best explained by God. Though there are many proofs for the existence of God, here is a quick review of just 5.
How do we know that God exists? Well, buckle your seatbelts because I'm going to give you 5 quick arguments for the existence of God. Number 1 is the universe had a beginning. We know this now from science, we know this from philosophy, that the universe began to exist. It's not eternal. Therefore, there must be a cause outside of the universe that's personal and powerful and intelligent, spaceless and timeless. That sounds a lot like God. The beginning of the universe points towards a beginner. Second, what we call the fine-tuning of the universe. There are certain universal laws of physics and cosmology that exist on a razor's edge. And they all have one strange thing in common. If these laws of, say, like gravity were the slightest bit different, our universe could not exist. Yet they're all set right where they need to be to allow the existence and sustenance of complex life. The fine-tuning of the universe points towards a fine-tuner. Third, DNA. Do you know how much information is inside the DNA in your body? I saw one study that said the amount of information in one cell in your body is equivalent of about 500,000 movies. That's 500,000 movies. Can you imagine? Now the question is, where does that information come from? Can't be explained by evolution, can't be explained by chemicals or time. Whenever we see information, a sign that says stop, we say a person put it there. So just as the information in a book points towards an author, the information in DNA points towards a mind or an author of life. Fourth, the moral argument basically has 2 premises. Number 1, if there's objective moral values, God must exist. There are objective moral values, therefore God exists. Now, how can we say there's objective moral values? Well, number 1, it's kind of obvious. We all know that torturing an innocent child for fun is wrong. We all know that, it's obvious. Second, in The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis said across cultures universally, There's common principles that everybody knows and lives as if they're true. Principles of honesty, principles of courage, principles of caring for posterity. Now the practice varies, but the principles are universal. So if there is an objective moral standard, and it seems to point towards God, I mean, after all, this points to a standard outside of human beings, to a universal law that we're supposed to follow, there must be a God. So if there's a moral law, it points towards a moral law giver. And last, I think one reason to believe there's a God is because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Jesus claimed to be God in human flesh. He died on the cross. The tomb is empty. We have radical accounts of Jesus appearing to people. And then our first witnesses were willing to die for this conviction. So here it is. The beginning of the universe points towards a beginner. The fine-tuning of the universe is best explained by a fine-tuner. The DNA, the information, points towards an author of life. A moral law points towards a moral law giver. And the resurrection of Jesus Christ tells us that that God entered into human history. We have good reason to believe that God exists.
What's up, guys? If you were here last week, you remember we talked about worldviews, what they are, and how they affect the way that we view the world. Everyone has a worldview, remember that, even Christians. And today, we want to dive in further with one of the first beliefs that a Christian worldview starts with, which is that God is real and there is nothing else like Him. Now, we just saw a brief review of a few of the reasons for believing that God exists. So you'll notice up on here there's a slide. This is really cool because what's awesome is that there's so much evidence for God's existence that we don't even have time to talk about all of that right now. The list that you guys just saw, that's just a list of 20 reasons to believe that God exists. Not only do we have good reasons to believe that God is real, but there is also really good answers to tough questions about Christianity. Questions like, how can God be loving if there's so much evil in the world, or if He sends people to hell? Or how can I know Jesus rose from the dead if I didn't see it myself? Or this one is everybody's favorite, if God created everything, who created God? These questions and so many more are answered carefully and thoughtfully by Christian apologetics, which helps to remove any doubt somebody has about Christianity. I would encourage you guys to learn more about some of these, and we will provide links to answer some of those questions that we just asked earlier just to get you guys started. So since belief in God is necessary in order to have a Christian worldview, we want you to be confident in believing that God is real and that He is the creator of everything. The Bible says in Proverbs that complete admiration and respect for God is the starting point of wisdom and knowledge. So it's crucial that you guys are confident that God exists and that He is real and that He's interested in you. Interestingly, the Bible actually talks a lot about this. And Paul's letter to the Christians in Rome, which naturally is called Romans, Paul starts the letter out by making the argument that everyone, even people who weren't Jews, believed deep down that God is real. Paul says that because of people's sin, they've suppressed this truth, which makes them deceive their own selves. Now, self-deception is a powerful thing, and a lot of us are guilty of wanting to believe things because it would be easier that way. You see, it'd be easier to believe that God doesn't exist. It would be easier to think that no one knows my deepest, darkest secrets and thoughts. It'd be easier if I could live as if there was no eternal consequences to my actions. It'd be easier to just live the way I wanted to live without any repercussions for that. But that isn't the case. There is a Creator, and He has called us to a life of beauty and peace and joy and righteousness. Paul says that we all know that God exists because God, and this is quoting Paul from Romans, God has made it obvious to them. For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see his invisible qualities, his eternal power, and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God. You see, Paul is saying that if we look carefully, science, logic, and the world around us point us to God, not away from him. Design points to a designer. A beginning points to a beginner. The beginning of all material things points to something not made out of material. The beginning of all time points to something that is timeless. The delicate balance of life points to a delicate balancer that has intention. You see, Paul then goes on to argue that our inner conscience, that moral compass that tells us right from wrong, points us to God because God gave it to us. Paul says that our moral compass is really God's moral law, and that even, now this is quoting Paul again, those who do not have God's written law show that they know the law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they are doing right. So you see, according to the Bible, God has given us, all of us, Christians or not, a moral law that is written on our hearts. And this is how we can tell good from evil. So what's interesting is that the only reason we can say something is evil is because we know that there are things that are good. But the only way we can tell the difference between good and evil is if we have a moral law that sets the standard and differentiates between good and evil. But a moral law requires a moral lawgiver. So the inner conscience, our inner conscience, points us to a moral lawgiver that is outside of us. So it points us to God. This means that no matter if we look outside of ourselves into the world around us or look inward into our conscience, God has given us evidence that he is real and that he cares about us. Not only does it show that we have many, many good reasons to believe in God, the Bible also teaches that there is only one God behind the creation of everything. Paul takes what we've learned here and he uses it when he's sharing the news about Jesus to a group of super smart Greek philosophers in Athens. Here's what he has to say, and this is in the book of Acts. Men of Athens, I notice that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw many of your shrines, and one of your altars had this inscription on it, to the unknown God. This God who you worship without knowing is the one I am telling you about. He is the God who made the world and everything in it. Since he is Lord of heaven and earth, he doesn't live in man-made temples, and human hands can't serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself gives life and breath to everything, and he satisfies every need. You see, Paul is saying here that we can't consider anything more important than God because God made everything. Literally nothing would be here without God, so nothing can be greater than God. So here is your bottom line this week. God is real, so a relationship with him is our greatest purpose. So last week we started our month's video challenge to win the $100. This week's video challenge is to watch the following video called God by the Bible Project. We're using the Bible Project this entire month. So just like last week, we will be posting on our Kidsman Facebook page one question that can only be answered if you've watched the video. And remember, no cheating because there's no way you had to actually watch the video. So watch with your parents and get them to help you find the answer. If you can give the answer next Sunday, then we'll put your name in the drawing to win a $100 gift card at the end of the month. So remember, the more weeks you do this, the more your name will get put in the drawing. So make sure you guys do it. So get to watching and studying, and we'll see you guys next week.